Hey guys, it's Maya and I'm here with a ring tutorial. Before I get started though, I did want to mention that it has been a semester and a half since I've uploaded my last YouTube video. I do apologize for that. I've had this one filmed for a little bit, but I haven't started editing or filmed a voiceover for it until right now. So I do apologize for that. I didn't mean for it to be this long, but you know, I was in my second semester of college, all of a sudden I had finals, and all of a sudden I was at home and I still had this video on my computer waiting to be edited. So at least I'm here now, you know? Today I will be showing you how I make my infinity and snake rings. These ones have been some of the most requested ring tutorials off of my Instagram and YouTube, so I thought I'd just combine them in one video. They also use pretty similar wire wrapping techniques, so once you learn how to do one, you can fairly easily do the other. So yeah, this is just me showing you all the rings that I've made. And now that that's done, let's just get started. As with most videos that I film, I will start off with the materials you'll need. So the first thing are pliers. You'll need 3 types: round nose pliers, flat nose pliers, and wire cutters. Now, you don't technically need all 3. The cutters can be replaced with scissors as long as you don't mind the scissors getting chipped, and the round nose pliers I think are the more important compared to the flat nose pliers, so if you're on a budget, just keep that in mind. The next thing you'll need is obviously wire. Here is the 28 gauge wire that I use. This is for wire wrapping. And then the other gauge wire that I use in this video is 18 gauge. This one is to actually make the frame of the ring. If you want the ring to be sturdier, you can use 16 gauge, but then it would be harder to manipulate. The next thing that you'll need is some sort of round object to make the shape of the ring. In other words, a ring sizer. I usually use my mascara that I never actually use for makeup and just use for ring making purposes, but you could also buy a regular ring sizer. And then lastly, you'll need some sort of ruler. I actually don't use it, but it might be helpful for you guys because I'll be giving you estimates of how much wire to cut. And that is all you'll need. On to the ring making. We're gonna start out with the snake ring, which is my personal favorite. Not that I'm supposed to have favorites. Anyways, this is the ring up close, just so you can see a bit more of the detail. The first step to creating this ring is using your round nose pliers and creating a small loop at the end of your 18 gauge wire. There's no need to cut any wire yet because we're going to try and save as much wire as possible and cut at the very end. Next, you're going to take a slightly wider part of your round nose pliers and create a bigger loop in the opposite direction. This should form a sort of hook shape. Now take whatever object that you've designated to be your ring sizer and start bending the wire around it. Keep on bending the wire until you're a little more than halfway around the ring sizer. Next, take your round nose pliers and bend the 18 gauge wire a bit more than perpendicular to the band. Pinch the wire approximately a centimeter away from the original bend with your round nose pliers and create another loop. Now you just keep on repeating this pattern in opposite directions until you fill the rest of the band that you left blank. Try and use different thicknesses of the round nose pliers just to make the loops different sizes and make it a bit more interesting. You can also vary the place at which you pinch the wire just so that the coils are different lengths. Once you're done forming all of your coils, take your ring sizer and bend them around the ring to complete the circle. Now we're going to finish off the frame by taking your round nose pliers and making an approximately 90-degree bend so that the wire is facing in the direction of the original band. And if you're still not satisfied with the shape, you can continue using your ring sizer to make it into a perfect circle. If you looked closely at the examples of the finished product that I showed you earlier, the band is actually 2 layers of 18 gauge wire, so what you're going to do is keep the ring on the ring sizer and continue bending that wire around until you hit the other end of the coils. Now you can take the ring off the ring sizer and use your round nose pliers to create the same kind of hook that's on the opposite side of the ring. Pinch the place that you want the hook to start with the thicker part of your round nose pliers, and then bend the wire over so that you make the start of the hook. And now you can finally use your wire cutters to cut the wire a little further past where you want the hook to end. This is because you want to finish the hook by making the little loop at the end of the wire with your round nose pliers. And if you discovered that you left a bit too much wire, you can always just cut off the excess and remake the loop. This is completely off topic, but I had a bit of extra time, so I thought I might as well fill it with my ramblings. But you should see me filming this. I'm talking a lot with my hands, even though you can't see any of it, so yeah, I'm just sitting in my empty bedroom, talking with my hands to a computer screen that isn't even recording my face. Okay, now I'm actually doing things on screen, so I'm gonna go back to the main topic. You'll find that the hooks are sometimes hard to bend around the ring sizer, so I always use my flat nose pliers to give it a little pinch and make the hook more curved. And now you're done with the frame of the ring. This was actually the harder part in my opinion. I find that wire wrapping is a bit easier, but you might also just want to practice the wire wrapping techniques that I teach you before you actually try it on a ring. Now you're going to cut maybe about 2 feet of 28 gauge wire to start wire wrapping. The length honestly doesn't really matter because you can always just end and then cut a new piece and keep going, but I would recommend about 2 feet because that's not too unwieldy. I usually start wire wrapping at the loop that ends one of the hooks. You can choose either one, it doesn't really matter. To make it a bit easier, I usually unbend the hook a little bit so that I can actually get the wire in, and now you just start wrapping the 28 gauge wire around the end of the hook. Although wire wrapping is pretty repetitive and once you get the hang of it, you kind of just keep on going, I would say it does require a little bit more attention to detail, so I usually use my fingernail and sometimes even my pliers to make sure that the coil is really tight around the frame of the wire. I mean the frame of the ring, not the wire. I should cut that out. As you can see, I'm using my fingernail to push the coil in tight so that all of the tiny circles made by the 28 gauge wire are stuck flush to each other. Once you've gotten around the bend of the hook and have actually started wrapping the two sides of the band together, you can start doing a pattern that is slightly more complicated than what you were originally doing, but not that hard to grasp. Basically what I'm doing is wrapping the 28 gauge wire twice around both bands and then twice around just the inner band. To wrap the 28 gauge wire around the inner band, you kind of have to sneak it in between the two wires that make up the band, which is a bit more cumbersome, but I think it looks pretty cool, so it's worth it. Again, here I'm just using my fingernail to press the coils tight together and make sure that there aren't any gaps. And this is what I have so far. You can kind of see the pattern of the two wire band coming along. This is just one of the many wire weaving patterns that I enjoy doing, but I think it looks best with this style of ring, so it's up to you. And this is what the 2 and 2 pattern looks like on the completed band of a ring. Alright, now I'll show you what happens when you run out of wire, because it's impossible to cut a long enough piece of wire to finish wrapping the whole thing, so you will inevitably run out. First, actually, I'll use my wire cutters to cut off the little bit of excess 28 gauge wire I had at the very beginning when I started wire wrapping at the loop. Then I use my fingernail to push down that little stubby end of the wire into the loop so that it doesn't stab anyone when people are wearing the ring. Then I go in with my flat nose pliers to really push down that end of the wire. And now we're going to finish off the other end of the wire. So I like to cut off this end of the wire when it's coming out from in between the two layers of the band. So I always pull it out from in between the two layers and then cut it really closely, so then I can just use my fingernail to push the end of the wire around the inner loop. And now you're ready to cut another 2-foot piece of wire and begin the process all over again. And now you basically just keep on wire wrapping. I usually start by sticking the end of the 28 gauge wire between the two layers of the band, and then starting to wrap. Make sure to continue the pattern that you left off with, so if you just finished doing 2 loops around the inner band, immediately start off with 2 loops around the outer band. Oftentimes you will have a little bit of excess 28 gauge wire where you started wrapping again with the new piece of wire, so just use your cutters and cut that off, and then smooth down the edge with your fingernail. And we made it! We're almost done with the band of the ring. So from here you have two choices. If you have very little 28 gauge wire left, you can just finish wrapping up the hook with the pattern that you started off with, just the singular coils around one strand of wire. However, if you have a bit of extra 28 gauge wire left, like I do, you can continue wrapping in the same direction until you hit the coils of the snake. And once you hit the coils of the snake, you just keep on wrapping in the same pattern that you used with the hook originally. I usually find it helpful to pull the coils a little bit apart just so that I can have access to the area in between. As you can see, I ran out of 28 gauge wire about halfway through doing the coils. After pinning down the edge with both my fingernail and the flat nose pliers, I'm ready to start with another piece of 28 gauge wire. However, instead of just starting where I left off, I actually like to start at the other end of the coils near the hook that is complete. To be honest, I don't really think it matters much where you start, so if you want, just continue where you left off. Whenever you're using the wire wrapping technique that I'm showing here, which is just the single coil around a single strand of wire, always try and leave a tail at the very beginning because it's hard to hold the coil in place when it's really small. So just leave the tail and then cut off the excess at the end. Here you can see me pushing down the excess wire with my fingernail and then snipping off the little bit that's left. And here's what I have after maybe another 30 minutes of wire wrapping. This sort of simple wire wrapping project is actually really good if you want to watch YouTube or a stream or something. I just exposed myself there. But if you want to watch a show or something, you can definitely do that while wire wrapping because it doesn't require that much focus as long as you have enough practice. Once you've finished wrapping the entire length of the coils, you can cut off any of the excess wire and then flatten the tail using your fingernails and a pair of flat nose pliers. And this is what I have so far. It's almost complete, except we did forget to finish wire wrapping the second hook. So what you're going to do is take maybe half a foot length of 28 gauge wire and just start wrapping the other hook using the same technique as we've been using throughout this video. Again, it's pretty useful to pull the hook out slightly so that you have enough room to maneuver in between the hook and the band of the ring. Once you've reached the end of the hook where the loop is, you can again cut off the excess and flatten it. Always remember to save your scraps of wire, especially the 28 gauge and 26 gauge wires, because you never know when you're going to need a tiny bit of excess wrapping wire to finish a project. And we're done! Here's the final product. It's a bit too big for my index finger, but that's just because I used like a random measurement, so I will be selling this one, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and on to the next tutorial. So this ring is going to use basically the same process as the snake ring. We're going to create a frame using the 18 gauge wire and then wrap it using the 28 gauge wire. I'm now realizing that it actually isn't an infinity ring technically because that's not an infinity loop, but I will just continue to call it that because it sounds nice. Anyways, here is how I make the frame. Start by wrapping your 18 gauge wire around the ring sizer until you form approximately a full circle. However, the ends should not be touching. As you can see, the ends are actually angled away from each other. Now, this part of making the frame is a bit more complicated, so please bear with me. The open ends are actually going to be at the back of the ring, so near the front of the ring you're going to take a smaller, maybe pencil or other round object, and start creating the infinity loops. To make the loop, you should bend the wire until it's approximately perpendicular to the band of the ring, and then bend it fully so that it creates the loop and is running more parallel to the band. Then to create the other half of the infinity, you're going to take that same object and create another loop facing in the opposite direction. I kind of like making the second loop a bit larger or smaller than the first loop, just to add a bit more interest to the ring. Once you've finished forming both loops, you can use your ring sizer to bend the loops around to create the actual ring shape. After you're done making any adjustments, put the ring back on the ring sizer, and now we're going to make the other half of the band, which is arguably slightly harder. Start by bending the wire completely around until you start overlapping with the loops. Essentially, what we're going to do is just trace the loops with the second round of wire. For me, even the 18 gauge wire is slightly hard to manipulate, especially when it's on the ring sizer, so I usually take it off and then use the pliers or whatever other tools I need to create the second part of the loop. There is honestly very little technique to this. I just kind of fiddle with it until it looks how I want it to look. As you continue making the frame and bending that second layer of 18 gauge wire, just make sure that the two layers are sitting pretty flush together because you'll have to wrap them together with the 28 gauge wire later. And as always, you can use the ring sizer to make sure that the entire ring is bending in a circle. Now, once you're satisfied with how the entire ring looks, you can take it off the ring sizer and start cutting your 28 gauge wire to wrap. I usually start wrapping this ring at the very back. So do you see how there's like an inner layer between the two ends? Start wrapping the 28 gauge wire around that inner layer and then choose whichever direction to go in. Once you've wrapped the 28 gauge wire around the inner layer a few times, you can start combining the inner layer with the outer layer. And if you've made the snake ring, you already know the pattern for wire wrapping that we use here. It's basically 2 loops around both layers of the frame and then 2 loops around just the inner layer of the frame. And here I'll just insert an up close of what the pattern looks like, just in case that's helpful. While you're wrapping, make sure that there's a bit of excess 18 gauge wire on either end of where you start, because we're going to create loops so that the wire doesn't dig into your finger. And as always, use your fingernail to make sure that the wire wrapping is nice and tight. And once you've gotten far enough, you can clip off the excess with your wire cutters and then pinch it down with your fingernail and flat nose pliers. And I completely forgot to mention this earlier, but you can actually use a pattern of 3 loops around the entire frame and then 3 loops around the inner layer instead of 2 and 2. It really just depends on your preference, so try both out and see what works for you. After about maybe 1.5 hours of wrapping and many YouTube videos later, this is what I have so far. I actually ran out of wire and was a bit too lazy when I was filming this to film it and, you know, cut off the excess and whatnot. So I'm just going to show you how I finish off this ring because the last bit of wrapping is pretty self-explanatory. With your round nose pliers, you're going to take the 2 ends of the 18 gauge wire frame that you didn't finish and just create 2 loops going in opposite directions. This is so that the 18 gauge wire doesn't dig into your finger as you wear it. And now I'm just fiddling with the entire frame just to make sure that the loops are nice and tight. And this is what the slightly unfinished, but I'm going to pretend that it's finished, ring looks like. I really like it. Yeah, obviously I wouldn't be showing you how to make it, but yeah, I'm not really sure where I was going with that. Anyways, there you go. Now for the outro. Hey guys, it's Mai here in the flesh. I just wanted to come on here and say that I hope you guys enjoyed the video, It was actually a lot of fun for me. I think after a few months of not editing, not drawing graphics, I hadn't realized how much I missed it. Even the recording voiceovers part, which is usually the worst part for me. So yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm really grateful for you guys for sticking by me through my very inconsistent posting on YouTube. I'm just really grateful that I have this little corner of YouTube that I can ramble to and who watch my videos and enjoy making what I make. The last thing I want to do is shamelessly self-promote. I do have an Etsy, so if somehow you're still watching this and you don't have the time or resources to make the rings that I've shown you today, you can always support me on my Etsy. I sell these rings and a few other things on there, so if you would like to do that, you are certainly free to. That part never gets less awkward. Yeah, I think that's basically it. I just wanted to say how grateful I was that you all are still watching me, are still interested in what I have to say and what I have to post, because it really means a lot to me that people are recreating my designs and taking what I love to do and transforming it into something that they can enjoy as well. So I don't know, that just makes me really happy. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Alrighty. I will stop rambling now and I hope to see you soon. Bye.